Now we're going to work on what I call the second level front annex, and that's the kind of slopey building section that goes right here in the front on the second level. And on the cutting guide there's a section called second level front annex, which lists all the pieces that we'll need out of medium weight chipboard. And then to get started, we're going to want to cut some arches, and I'm using this Tim Holtz sized arch. It's the medium one, and it measures about 1.75 inches across, not quite, and then 3 inches tall. So if you don't have this die, you could cut an arch that is that size and use that as a template. So anyway, I'm going to, I also want to put the decorative paper on one of these before I cut out that arch. And so here on the decorative paper it says that for the annex walls we need a piece that is 4 1/4 by 8 inches. So I'm going to use this paper for my annex, but on the back it has these nice borders, and I'm not sure if I'm going to want to use these borders or not. So I think what I'll do is just reserve these two bottom borders here, and then come in and cut my 4 1/4 by 8 inch piece from this next section. That way I'll reserve the option to have these borders if I want to use them. So I'll get that cut and then I'll be back. So now that I have my piece of paper cut, I'm going to follow the scoring that's over here, and that is 1/2 inch, and then 2 inches, 6 1/8, and 7 5/8. And then we will crease on our score lines. One side has a 1/2 inch tab and one side has a 3/8 inch tab, just so that I thought 3/8 would be sufficient, but then that gives us a nice even number for the paper to work with at 8 inches. So we have a piece that's shaped like this. So I've prepped one of my front pieces, and these pieces are almost square, so you want to be careful. Make sure that you have the 4 1/4 is the height and 4 inches is the width. I've prepped with score tape all around, and then I just put a 2 inch piece in the middle because that's where I'm going to cut my arched opening out of. If you don't have 2 inch wide tape, just put tape in the middle so that it comes out to 2 inches. So then it will support the opening here. And then what we want to do is put this on our paper in the center there, but the center has been sized so that it is 1/8 of an inch bigger than this piece of chipboard, and that's to allow for when we put our sides in. So when you go to stick this down, you can just use your sides to help make sure that you get it centered in there, and go ahead and get that adhered to the paper in the center of that larger section. Now we want to put our die right in the center, so I'm going to draw a center line down this side, and it is 4 inches wide, so I can just measure 2 inches and draw a center line here. And when I put the die on, I want to make sure that the opening comes flush with the bottom of this chipboard down here, and then gets centered on the line. So I'll just use some of my low-tack tape to hold that die in place and go ahead and cut it. And then we need to cut a similar opening in a plain piece of chipboard, and I would suggest you go ahead and do the front one first, and then just in case you don't get it exactly centered, you'll want to place the die in the same place on the other one so that you'll have two pieces that match up. So this is what it looks like when I'm prepped and ready to make my cut. So I'll go ahead and do that and then be back. So here are my two pieces with my arched opening cut in, and next we want to cut an angle in our sides, and our sides, the front of this angle will be the same height as the front wall, so I'm just using that so that I don't have to measure. And then I'll just make a diagonal line and cut those two pieces off. So here are my two sides with score tape attached. I've also attached a small piece here on the top and on the two tabs here. I've done that because this paper doesn't go all the way up to the top on the sides. And now I'll just use some cardstock joining strips, and I'll make sure that I put these with their score tape down and those short angles matching there, and then just use butt joints and put my cardstock joining strips on. So now we're ready to put the second arched opening inside of the first one, and when we do that we're going to use our spacers that we cut, and we'll first go around the arched opening and use 2 for that, and then we'll use 2 just to kind of support the sides. So to do the ones that are going on the center here, first we want to measure by lining up the bottom evenly and just making a little line where that curve begins. And then I'm just going to make a series of shallow cuts, probably about 1/8 of an inch wide, and I would say about 1.5 inches. Let's try and see how that works. So I'll just take this, and you can either use a craft knife to do that, or I have an older blade in this trimmer, so I can just use that, and if I don't come too deep I can just move that along like that and make a series of 1/8 inch cuts, and they only go partially through. Now you can see I think you can see that I've marked this with a C. I use this blade just for doing this kind of a thing, and not using it to also cut paper with. This chipboard dulls the blade, so this is just the method that I use. So there's 1.5 inches worth, and we should be able to kind of curve this a little bit and see if that's going to be sufficient to fit up here, and it is. So I'm going to do that on one other piece, and then I'll be back and we can put these together. So I still have my center line from when I put in my arched opening, so I'll just take my side piece, having this end flush, and coming up here and curving it till I see where that line is, and then just making a tick mark. I can cut that off, and I'll do that for the other side as well. So I have my two pieces here cut to length, and I have just a little piece of cardstock joining strip that I'll put on the inside of that top part and join these two together. Mine needs a little trim here. Give that a burnish. And then we can try this on and see how that goes. And then we'll just run a little bead of glue here and put this piece on. So to glue this on, I put one side down first and let that set up for a minute, and then I'll just swing this other side out of the way and run my bead of glue along this edge and put the second side on. And while these sides are drying, I can go ahead and put my other two spacers on. They go right along the edges here because our piece that we're going to add is the same width as the front. So just put them on right up against that seam, but they'll just kind of stand here in space. And just to kind of help hold these side ones in place a little bit, I'm just using the little pieces I snipped off the top of the arched opening, put some glue on them, and they don't fit exactly down here in the bottom, but they can help hold those side pieces in place and keep them vertical while they're setting up. So I've got them down here in the two bottom pieces. You can see, I think there's little gaps there, but that's all right. And then once our little spacers have set up, I'll just take my other front piece that I've cut the opening in. I've run a bead of glue around all of the openings here and put this in place. Check that everything is flush and lined up, and then let that dry. Now I want to have some trim around the opening, so I've cut a piece that is 2 inches by 3 1/4, and I'm just going to use one of the leftover cutout pieces here, and I want to cut a shape that is about 1/8 of an inch bigger than the opening. And I did darken, this is some of that check paper that we used on the interior structure from the 6x6 pad, and I did darken it with some of the ink. So now I'm just going to cut something that is about 1/8 of an inch bigger all around. So now I have my shape cut out, and I took my marker, my black marker, and went around the edges. And now we need to cut out some from the center of this because there will be too much to wrap. So I'm just going to use my ruler and come in about 1/2 inch and make a cut on each side. Now if you've got, I don't know if I said before I did this, I put score tape on the back of it. And so make sure you hold on to it because sometimes that score tape is a little slippery. And then I'll just continue with my 1/2 inch approximately up here, just using my ruler kind of as a guide until I have this shape that I can release from the center here. So we don't need that. And then what we'll do is get it centered on here. and stick it down, and then we'll make some little release cuts in order to wrap it to the inside. Now to help us, I'm going to just make a little pencil mark. It is right here at my center point, so I'll know where to line up my center there as well. So go ahead and get that stuck down. Make sure you pull this apart at the bottom so that you have a good 1/8 of an inch on either side of your opening. Once you have that adhered, go ahead and give it a really good burnish all around. Now, looking at it from the back, I can make a cut. I'm going to let my scissors bump up right against the edge there, and I'll just make a cut where it stops being straight, and then make a series of little cuts here. Oh, probably not too many, because it's not all that curved here. And then one up at the top. So I ended up making 3 cuts in the middle there, and then I'll come around here and do the same thing on this side, one where it stops being straight, and then about just kind of splitting this up in here. And now I'll use my bone folder just to kind of come along that edge and train these to want to turn, because with that really narrow part on the front, you'll have to be careful that it stays on the front and doesn't want to come and wrap toward the inside. But with your bone folder, you should be able to do that. And I'm just gradually turning my bone folder to the inside so that more and more is hitting the inside edge. And then when I have it pretty well turned, I can just come in here with my fingers and finish putting that down, and then come with my bone folder along that inside piece. And now we have a nice piece of trim on the front. Now I also want to trim this back edge here. So I've cut a strip that is 1/2 inch by 6 inches, run some score tape on the back. I again darkened it a little bit with my distress ink. And then I'll remove this backing. And then I'm just going to start it at the bottom here on the inside. It doesn't need to match up with what's going on. I mean, it can, they're in the center there. But I'm just going to kind of run it along the inside edge there. Make sure I get a good point up there at the top, and then come back down. Now it'll be a little bit short, don't worry about that. And then again, make some little cuts here to release it. And we'll make those cuts where it's straight, and then right at the top, and then a couple places in between. This part won't show as much, so but you still want to do a good job. And then press those to the back side. And then you can just use this little scrap that was left over from cutting out the center to fill in this little gap that's down here at the bottom. And then finally, to finish the inside off, I've cut 2 strips of black cardstock that are 1/2 inch wide. I backed them with some score tape. And I'm doing this in 2 pieces because I want to have a nice sharp point up here at the top, and I just think that that will happen better when I use 2 pieces. So this is about 5/8 of an inch wide inside of here, so the 1/2 inch strip just kind of gets centered, and push it all the way up to the top, and then watch both edges as you come down. And then just use some sharp scissors to trim off any excess at the bottom. And then repeat that on the other side. Now you can choose whatever scene you'd like to have peeking through the doorway there. I'm using a scene from the back of this paper that I used to cover the back corner towers. And I'm using this little scene right here. And I'm just deciding how I want to have it placed in there. And I know I don't want to cut off, there's a little dog here in the front, and I don't want to cut that off. And I think it'll be just about like this. And so whatever scene you're going to have, we're going to attach it to this final piece of the front that's the same size. And I cut that to the same size just to make it easier to put it on. So here I can kind of see, let me see if I can hold this up. When I hold it up, I can see where I want to draw my lines and cut out my piece to go on the inside there. So I'll go ahead and do that. So I attached my image to my piece of, the last piece of the front, and I put some score tape around it. And I also added a ledger strip here on the back that I've held back 1/8 of an inch from the back, and it's our normal 1/16 inch, or the width of the chipboard from the bottom there. And then on the back here, I've just run some 1/8 inch, which I could easily curve around here so that it would be close to that opening right there. So now these two pieces will match right up, one on top of each other, and you can put it in this position so you know that it's sitting flat against the bottom, and then that will put your little image in the doorway. So I'll go ahead and remove my score tape backing and put that in place. And now that we have our little scene in place, we can go ahead and attach our back. I'm just using a butt joint here, and I'll prep this other side with a joining strip as well. Then we can add more ledger strips. To see where to put them on the sides, I've already marked it. I'll show you how I did that. So fold up the side and draw a mark here on the inside, and this is where our ledger strip will go, and the same thing over on this side. Draw a line here, and we can fit in a little 1/2 inch piece of ledger strip on that side. Again, we'll hold these back 1/16 of an inch from the bottom edge. Over here we only have room for a small piece, so that we allow room for our joining strip. And then of course we'll put one last piece along the back here, burnish those in place. Now we can make this final join here. You'll have to reach in to do that. Now these sides will just kiss when they come together. And you'll have to trim off this excess joining strip up here at the top, these two little corners. And now we can do our final wrap of the side paper. Just remove all of this backing and wrap the decorative paper. And then finally we want to fill in with our little base piece back here. Now I need to trim about 1/16 of an inch off of mine, and I think you probably will too, but so that this piece will end up being, instead of 3/4 of an inch, it'll be 11/16 of an inch wide. And then we'll be able just to run a bead of glue along those ledger strips. And fit that base right inside there. So of course we still have to add the roof, but there's the wall and the little inset. We have 3 pieces for our roof, the roof front and 2 roof sides. And these roof sides, we want to cut them in half diagonally, just from opposite corner to opposite corner. And I'll do that for both pieces. And then we'll glue them together so that we have a double thickness. So here are my little glued up triangles, and I'm going to take a black marker and darken their short side and up a little bit on one, and make sure you're working in mirror images here. And maybe just come a little bit on that front corner just in case things don't meet up perfectly. And then before we glue them onto the side of our annex, we want to cut some paper. And when we cut this paper, we want to cut it so that one angle, the hypotenuse and the base of the triangle are cut exactly to match, and then you have about a 1/2 inch tab here in the back. It doesn't matter if it's exactly a 1/2 inch. And make sure you cut mirror images so you have 2 pieces like this ready to go. So once you have those pieces cut, we can go ahead and install these, and these get matched up exactly with the point that we have on our sides. So just put a little glue right here. And match that point up. I find it easier to do this on the side because I want that top to be flush right there. And then I'll repeat it for the other side. And while those sides are drying, we can go ahead and put some paper on the flat part of our roof. And I've cut this somewhere between 1/4 and a 1/2 inch wider all around than my base paper here. I wanted to keep my pattern centered, so that's why I say between 1/4 and a 1/2 inch, just so you have something that you can wrap on all of the edges. And if you're like me, if you want to center a pattern, just make sure you have at least 1/4 inch, and you don't really need more than a 1/2 inch. And so I put tape on all 4 edges, and I've also put tape around all 4 edges of my piece of roof. And so I'm going to go ahead and adhere that down in where I like my pattern to be to begin with. So I'll do that. And then I'll just use my bone folder on the bottom side and the 2 short sides, just to get that started to wrap around there a little bit. And then I'll continue to use my bone folder to wrap the bottom edge around and kind of mark where it comes to the end of the chipboard here, because I want to cut off those ears. So I think you can see the little notches that I've cut out here, And so now I can go ahead and I'm just going to wrap only that bottom edge. And for a lot of these roofs, I'm just going to bring it even with the edge, but because this one's at a slant, you'll see more of this bottom edge, and that's why I decided to wrap it. Now, if this looks like too much work to you, you can just go ahead and cut the paper even, but you'll want to blacken that edge of the chipboard before you do that. And next we want to, from this edge that's covered here, snip back these corners at a 45-degree angle. And then I just like to take a little marker right on that edge. I don't think it's going to show, but it's easier to do that at this point. Now how this is going to go on is that the bottom edge of the roof lines up with the corners on the triangular pieces. And then this will wrap around to the back. So we can just go ahead and put some glue on these two pieces, the edges of the triangle. Make sure you've got your bottom edge here. It should match up with those two triangles. And just hold that with some pressure for a few minutes. And then once that's set, we'll want to make a couple of release cuts. We can make one on the tab that's coming over the edge here and make it even with the end of our triangle. And then you can bend the back over the top here and just make a couple of cuts at a slight angle to the corner there. So I think you can see that, hopefully, how they're coming at an angle. And then reach in and remove the score tape backing on the tab that's coming over the triangle side, and put that down and flip it over and repeat it on the other side. And note that we have not attached this top flap yet. Now we're ready to add our triangle pieces. I have blackened my edges here, and that triangle piece will fit right on the side. I've prepped it with score tape to fit on the triangle and then also on the tab here. And then I'll go ahead and fasten this tab to the back. Now if this top edge is going to interfere, you can angle it back a little bit. On mine it's not a problem. And I'll give that a good burnish and repeat on this other side. And then the final step is to fasten down this last part on the top of the roof and give that a good burnish. And then there's our little annex.